Welcome back to Your Story Medicine. Today I am with Jeff Harry, who heals the world through play, starting with organizations and individuals who have forgotten how to nurture their inner child. Some of the topics he covers includes how to deal with toxicity in the workplace, how to address office politics, how to play with your inner critic, and how to help your staff rediscover their flow, especially when it comes to navigating uncertain times. He was also selected as one of the top 100 human resource influencers of 2020. Like, how do you even get selected as that during a pandemic?
I don't know. I don't know how it happened. I really don't. It just happened.
So, how did Jeff even end up here on this podcast? Well, actually, I don't remember what event we met at, but what I do remember
I
is
do. I remember.
what I remember is that you gave me a bow tie made out of Legos.
I did.
And I thought that was the cutest thing ever. And I just started to I've been following your content, and your page was one of the few places where I could still feel joy amidst so much uncertainty and chaos. I was like, who is this big ass
Oh,
kid?
that's so nice. Thanks. I'm so glad. I was doing that for me. I was just trying to get through the pandemic.
We give the medicine it is we need. Where did we meet?
We met at Lisa Nichols' mastermind thing.
Oh,
We were doing you were doing this event with my friend Marcy. And then Marcy invited me to be like, hey, come for the party afterwards from doing some event. And I rocked in and I was like, what's happening here? Like, y'all have been doing some 3-day intensive event. And then there was poker afterwards. And I remember just dancing around
oh
with
my
random strangers and being like, this is great. I'm in San Diego dancing with random strangers. What a lovely
goodness.
experience.
Yeah, what I love so much about these environments is how it really does connect us with the people that we have no idea of how much we actually need them in our lives.
Right.
And so, Jeff, actually, one of the first things that I love to ask all of my guests, which is something that Lisa taught me, who was one of my first coaches and mentors, is what are you celebrating about yourself today?
Ooh, what am I celebrating about myself? That I still have like a really playful spirit after such a crazy last 2 years. That, as well as like what I did today, or just the last 2 days, I ran a workshop about playing with your inner critic for like Cal State, University. And it was a bunch of people on there, and we were just exploring like, how do you like deal with your inner critic? And there were like people, even though I could only see them in the chat, but they were like crying in the chat. They were like, this is so emotional and so powerful, and also so much fun. And I was like, this is it. This is what makes me like come alive. So like, I'm celebrating like being able to do stuff like that. That just amps me up.
Yeah, and get paid for it.
And
So
get paid? What?
I know that you use big terms like positive psychology, and look, the ways that you're able to infiltrate organizations and institutions through play is what blows my mind the most. So, how is it that you would describe your medicine if somebody were to ask, so what is it that you do?
I lift the veil of BS and I use play to do it. That's why. That's how I do it. Like, I was just on a podcast the other day and we were talking about gaslighting, like the amount of gaslighting that's happening as people are trying to, like, as they're returning to work. Right. And, and people are like, well, you got to come back to the office. Well, why do I have to come back to the office? I'm more productive when I'm working at home. Well, we need you near us. Well, why do you need me near us? I don't know. It's just need it. Like, there's such a disconnect between what we have now learned over the last year and a half about ourselves and what we need, from a mental health standpoint, and then what the pre-pandemic, capitalistic world is asking us to do, because we're like, I'm not doing that anymore. Right. And I was like really inspired by like Naomi Osaka, who just was like willing to walk away from millions of dollars because she was just like, I'd pick my mental health over money anytime. And I don't think a lot of like either the boomer or Gen X, leaders realize like how much Gen Zers are now almost leading the charge. It's like Gen Zers and millennials and then Gen Xers that are leading the charge, that are like, I'm prioritizing my mental health over your profit or over money in general. Like, I care about me. I'm doing stuff for me. I'm giving myself my own medicine, because whatever you've been giving me has not been enough. And I'm only realizing it now because I've gotten a year and a half to think about it.
Yeah. So I think it's so easy to also just be like, okay, who is this adult? They need to grow up. I remember you actually being told by that by one of my exes, who was like, you play too much. And I've heard that a lot from other people too, like, you play too much, grow up. And one of my struggles has been my inability to be able to hold a job, hence why I'm probably an entrepreneur today. I am forever unemployable, which could either be an asset or a detriment. And so I am curious about your own upbringing and also your own ancestral lineage, because from what I do know, both you and I are children of immigrants.
Yep.
And I know my parents, I just turned 34, and they're just like, this girl plays too much. When is she going to grow up? Like, she's still a baby. And I kind of want to be like, actually, I have a thriving business.
Right.
And then I'm like, maybe I should be doing something more seriously. And so I'm curious about how all of this has unfolded in your life.
Sure. So first, let me answer the issue or the question around you're playing too much, right? So there's a lot of like shoulding coming from that, right? So when people ask me, why don't adults play enough? I always say 148,000 no's. Like, there was a study done that found that by the time you reach the age of 18, you've heard the word no 148,000 times. Then you go to school where you're asked to raise your hand and ask for permission all the time. And then adults, especially, immigrant adults, are constantly shooting on you all the time. You should become a doctor. You should become a lawyer. You should be this. You should be that. Pushing their own insecurities onto you. And you're like, I'm 6 years old. Why are you giving me advice at 6 years old, right? Then you get to your teenage years, right? And especially for Gen Zers now, and you're inundated. We're inundated with more information in a day than most people received in the 1950s in an entire year. And what is most of the information telling you? You're not enough. You need to act more like an adult, right? And also, the one thing you shouldn't do is play. You shouldn't be yourself. You shouldn't be your weird, nerdy self and follow like your magic or your medicine or the thing that like speaks truth to you. Don't do any of that, because then you can't buy stuff from Amazon. Like, you'll be too fulfilled, right? So there's this whole industry and like all of this propaganda telling us not to play, right? And then adults, both like spouses and, as well as like our family members, that also have bought into the same propaganda because they've been doing it for so many years. When I say like, dude, the Joneses, why are we trying to keep up with the Joneses? The Joneses are boring. The Joneses are miserable. Why would we want to even do that, right? So there's all that you're dealing with, right? So then tying it into my own, background, my dad is from a small island off the coast of Barbados called St. Vincent. There's only 100,000 people on that island. He was one of the first doctors off that island to make it in the US. My mom comes from the Philippines, came here during the Vietnam War, right? When they had an influx of Filipino nurses. And they met in like an operating room, right? And their life was all about you know, trying to get accepted in like this American culture, you know. So I'm this Black Filipino Vincipino person just walking around, and people are like, "What are you? You're so weird." And then for a long time, I did not embrace that, right? But then the more I started to embrace it, I mean, I tell this story all the time that I felt so ostracized that at some point I stopped being cool. I would go to my basement and then just make up games in my basement. And then anyone else that didn't want to be cool as a high schooler would come here and we just play nerdy games and just make up stuff because this was the one place where they could be who they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like just that, I realized like play is a place where you can be safe. The playground is safe here. There's no judgment here. This is why we get along, because we're both super weird and we own it, right? And people are jealous of that. And then
What?
and they can't say anything, so they tell you to be an adult because they don't like how you're making them feel. You're making them feel weird. You're
Or they fire you.
What?
Or they fire you because
they fire because you don't fit the mold. And not only do you don't fit the mold, but the other thing that's other reason why they fire you is because you're dangerous.
Ooh.
Because you might talk to other people and be like, this is not worth it. Like, what are we doing? Why? What? You know, someone said this to me the other day, and she was just like, I want to pursue my career as an astrologer and like trust my intuition, but I don't know if I can make money doing it. Is that crazy? And I was like, no, you know what's crazy? Working 50 hours a week for, you know, 2,500 hours a year, you know, for 50 years. And then at the end of it, finding out that that company was going to replace you at any moment. That's crazy. That's madness. Yeah. And so most people are actually the people that are acting mad in the world. And we are the, you know, we're the fun people that are lifting the veil on it and being like, it's all BS. No one knows what they're doing. So you might as well be you. You might as well be you.
Send her to me. I can help her. But that's the thing. It's so easy to then be like, oh, okay, so all I got to do is play and then everything's going to work out. And one other thing I wanted to mention when you were talking about being children is that we are given this playground in elementary school. And then when you get to middle school or high school, then it's just a bare field. There was no transition period.
Yep.
And so the only way that we really have to express our play is maybe through sports, or through me, it was through theater.
Yep.
And then
it's still so results oriented then, right? Yeah. It's still so much about like fame and recognition. And so you lose the play aspect, because like I define play as any joyful act where you're like fully present in the moment, where you like forget about time, right? You're like fully in flow. You don't have anxiety about the future. You don't have regrets about the past, right? And then play is also the opposite of perfection. Perfection's rooted in ego, shame, constantly being right. Am I doing this right? Well, play is rooted in curiosity, awe, wonder, all the things that you represent. This is why people are attracted to you in your work, because you are providing them medicine of connecting with their old story and realizing like, I'm more than just my job. You know, I'm more than just, my worth is not attached to my productivity.
Nor is it attached to the money in your bank account. So did you play your way to success then? What was your experience in being able to actually turn play into your medicine and your career?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the really short version is I started writing toy companies when I was in 3rd grade, right? After I saw the movie Big, and I was like, you can play for a living? Oh my goodness. So I started writing toy companies thinking, you know, that's what, because he just played with toys for a living. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a job. That's going to be my job. So I was just obsessed with getting in the toy industry, and I wrote them from third grade all the way up through college until I got in the toy industry. And then when I got there, I don't know if you ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted and then been so disappointed when you get there. But it was like there was no play, no fun, no high fives. Like it was just cubicle walls, no kids, no toys in a toy company. And I'm like, what's happening? So I leave that. That was in New York, and I come to the Bay Area. You know, I had no idea what I was doing with my life, hopped on Craigslist, found a job where they were teaching kids engineering with Legos, 7 nerdy guys just messing around. And I started doing it as just like a joke of a job. And then I was like, ooh, this is really fun. I get to just do what I did in my basement, create safe spaces for nerdy kids to like connect. And I was like, I'm going to make this a thing. And we grew it into like the largest Lego STEM organization in the US. And we did it all by playing. Like we had no idea what we were doing. We picked cities we thought were fun. We picked people we thought were fun. No business plan, none of it, right? And we would just experiment, and we would like make mistakes and be like, oh, don't do that again. And we picked cities that we were just like, who wants to go to Austin? That seems fun. Who wants to go to Wyoming? I don't want to go to Wyoming. Okay, then we won't do that. We just, that's what we did. And then we got the attention of Silicon Valley, and they were like, hey, you teach my kids. Do you run stuff for adults? And we're like, of course we do. No, we didn't, but we just said yes to everything because that's what we did. And I ended up running team building events, for Fortune 500 companies for like the next decade. But what I found, this is why I created my organization, is at the same time that they talked about disruption and, risk taking and being your authentic self, in many ways, these top companies were not doing that. So I created Rediscover Your Play to actually use like positive psychology and play to lift the veil on the BS they were saying and be like, how do we really address toxic masculinity in the workplace? How do you have a hard conversation? How do you deal with your inner critic? How do you get your staff in flow? How do you get them back into the office without forcing them back in the office, right? Like, what are you doing, right? So I'm focused now on just like addressing pain points of companies and being like, are you really saying what you claim to be? Are you really allowing people to be themselves? Because if so, you should hire me. If not, then just keep doing what you're doing. But guess what? People are going to quit. So, the more I do that, the more it resonates with people because they're like, oh, I didn't even realize we needed that.
I need to back it up a bit because you mentioned toxic masculinity. And look, in my past life, one of my roles was actually doing diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops. And while it brought me some joy to be able to see to be able to support people with connecting the dots with how systemic oppression has played a role into how it is we show up today, why certain people have more or less access than others. For me, it got to a point where it was just so disembodied.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, there has to be something different. Sometimes it just feels so heavy. And I'm curious then, how is it that you would address something like toxic masculinity or even racism and oppression through play? So, how is it that this can help heal the world?
Yeah, so I run a workshop, for example, with my friend Gary Ware called How to Deal with A-Holes at Work Through Play, right? And the whole workshop is all about role playing. We first like try to embody what it's like to be the a-hole. We are like, what does it feel like? Do I like how it feels? Do I not like how it feels? Then we practice like different scenarios where we're in a meeting with a bunch of a-holes. Oh, now we're in a meeting with a bunch of people that are passive aggressive. How does that feel? And then eventually we get to the point where we're like, all right, now, and mind you, in the middle of these, we're also addressing like, what's going on? What are the signs of this toxicity? How do we actually approach it? How, if you're going to have this hard conversation with this person, you don't attack their character, but you address their behavior, right? And then we actually practice the conversation that they're going to have either with the a-hole or with the person above them. Because many times it's not even, like, don't worry about that person. We're talking about the group and being like, that Chad, sorry if there's a Chad that listens to this, but that Chad, even though he brought in $1 million last year as the brilliant jerk that everyone loves, he also got 5 of our staff to quit.
Ooh.
That cost us $2 million. So are we okay with Chad staying? Like, are we okay with this? Because this is actually affecting your money. It's affecting your pocketbook. Are you okay with that? And the more that, like, you're empowering people to be like, we don't have to tolerate that behavior, that is super powerful. So then it's not even about like, all right, we're just taking the burden on and then just what is it, just ingesting all of that pain and suffering. It's more this idea of like, let's play and realize, oh, we all have a-holes at our jobs, and usually it's only a couple people, and if we organize, who knows, we might be able to get that person to leave. Or the other thing that might happen, you might realize, I don't want to put in all that work, I'm gonna leave. Great, that's another solution as well. So it's not like we're just trying to be like, here, you have to figure it out, right? We're giving people many options and making people see the challenge with curiosity.
I love that. And something else that could happen from a restorative lens is that this person who is creating harm is finally going to realize it and shift their behavior. And I love this. Okay, I need to brag a little bit because this excites me so much. When I was freelancing as an arts educator, I've worn many hats. One of the series I designed was an 8-week workshop for 30 teenage men of color called Redefining Masculinity. And I did it through spoken word and hip hop, and just like you, through role play. Like, one of our workshops was called Women Hold Up Half the Sky, where we role played what happens when their mothers come home from work or when their fathers come home from work. What are the roles of the woman? And they played it out. And then we have a dialogue about how, okay, the women in the household are the ones who are told they got to be the ones to cook, to clean. And then they embodied what an alternative can look like.
Oh, that's cool.
It was so beautiful. And I'm just like, oh, I want to bring more of this play. And then we would end it off with a cipher because, like, let's write some new pieces. Let's write our own stories. And so I would love to see this happen more so in adults, because I feel like we put so much emphasis on play with young people when adults are just oftentimes teenagers, young children who have never had a chance to heal from those wounds. And so when you are able to bring adults back into play, what happens to their body?
Well, what's interesting is, as you just said it, I was like, adults are just scared kids, right? That are just been living longer. So when they actually do embody it, you see everyone's inner child. And then it's almost like you're watching a playground of all these adults letting their inner childs play on the playground. And you can feel the energy. I'm sure you've felt it yourself when you've been in certain magical moments. We were there when we met each other, and people were like dancing and high-fiving, and just because they are tapping into a place that they haven't tapped into in such a long period of time, right? They're seeing the world anew through like childlike eyes again. And I don't, when we ran this workshop, this dealing with a-holes at work workshop in Australia, we saw people that went from laughing to realizing they weren't alone, to crying, to hugging each other, to laughing more. Like, it was like a Pixar movie, like all the emotions, right? And that's what happens when you run something really well like that, and you allow people, you give people permission to be embodied.
Well, and beyond that, if we want to look at it from a somatic lens, because it's like, okay, play and then everything's going to be figured out. I think that many times we can mistake play for immaturity versus
Hmm.
seeing it as a tool for healing, for liberation. And so I know that you like to nerd out on the brain as well. So, how is it that play can actually help us to heal from our trauma?
Sure. So, two things that happen. Well, let me first go into one thing that happens when your brain's at play is you actually go through something called transient hypofrontality, right? It's where you go from a beta state, that's your brain state, to a flow state. All of a sudden, through transient hypofrontality, transient is temporary, hypo is under activity, and frontality is the prefrontal cortex. What happens is your inner critic actually gets quiet. It dissipates. It shuts down, and then you get this shot of dopamine, and you become highly curious. And then instead of like what most adults are, right? They're fixated on one result and expectations are the thief of joy. Instead, they see all of these opportunities in front of them. And you felt this when you traveled, right? Where you're just like saying yes to everything. Yes, I'll have another mimosa. Yes, I'll hop on a moped. Yes, I'll go to a deserted island. Yes, I'll dance under the moonlight. And all of a sudden I meet the love of my life. How is this all happening? Because I'm in flow, right? I'm allowing myself to like recognize what the universe is saying to me right now. And I trust it. I trust my intuition. I trust myself, and I trust my creativity. And what happens when you're not in flow, when you're constantly focused on being perfect, you can't hear any of that. None of that's happening. Right? So you can't even hear your inner child who's constantly whispering you ideas that make you nerve-sided. There's so many ideas. If you get bored enough, if you can get quiet enough, like, and when I tell people to get bored, it sounds weird coming from a play guy, but when you allow yourself to actually get bored, um all of a sudden, and what I mean by that is like you shut off YouTube, you're not looking at Netflix, you're not looking at email, you're not trying to take a photo, you're not trying to capture the moment on Instagram, you're just sitting there, right? Or walking around, whatever. Think about when you were a kid, that's when you had your most mischievous ideas, right? It's these crazy ideas, but these are also the ideas that make you nerve-sided, right? Nervous and excited. And then it whispers crazy stuff to you like, hey, create a video, start a podcast, go to Hawaii, right? And if you follow any of this, regardless of whatever happens, reach out to that person you've been wanting to reach out to for 6 months. Regardless of whatever happens, when you take that risk and actually try it, it expands who you are. It expands what's possible, right? It's where you're actually now tapping into, what your ancestors like spoke of. Like there's a magic there that you can't even explain, and you feel like you're being guided, right? And now you realize, what is fear? False evidence appearing real. And you jump into this pool of uncertainty and you're like, wow, it's not that bad here. It's actually kind of fun. And then you take another risk and another risk, and all of a sudden you expand what's possible. And that's why I do a risk a day. That's why I track a risk a day, just to see what is something I'm going to do, whether that's me being vulnerable or me, sharing in a way that I've never thought possible, just to see where I might go.
Wow, nerve sided. I love that. I have a confession to make. So, one of the reasons why I did not get back on my plane to to come back to Los Angeles was because my friends out there suggested that I stay longer to have my own solo retreat. And I actually failed at it. Why? Because as I arrived to my yurt and you saw my Instagram, yes, I was having fun and I was so excited to eat top ramen, except there was other people who were on the land that wanted to be in my energy.
Mm,
And they wanted to play with me essentially. And
mm,
my ego was like, everybody leave me alone. I'm trying to have my
mm-hmm,
solo, serious,
mm-hmm.
silent meditation, be by myself and have spiritual awakening time. And instead, I just kept having people show up to
Mm-hmm.
provide. And it taught me that while I was trying to resist all the people around me, and while I was trying to be serious,
Yep.
the universe was telling me that when I think I'm going to be alone, when I think I'm going to feel lonely, that I am always going to be provided for. It was the wildest thing. And now that I'm back here in LA, I'm back in the frequencies of the city. I'm already just like stressed out again, just like, oh, nobody wants to play around here. Everyone's so
Hmm.
serious. And yet, why is it whenever I travel, I just feel like I'm constantly receiving evidence that everything is in alignment. And then there's this fear that creeps up that, oh, this is just a phase. Like, even right now, I'm like, that was just a honeymoon. And
Uh-huh.
is it possible for me and for everybody to actually live this kind of life in every single waking moment when we are living in 40, 50, 60 hour work weeks where we have to clock in minimum of 8 hours a day? It's like, how is
Hmm.
it that we change that if that is not even ancestral to us?
Right. That's a great question. Because really what we're asking is just like, can I live in a world of bliss, right? When there's
Yes.
so much that is trying to destroy that bliss.
Mhm.
And you even said an interesting word when you were like, well, I failed. Well, what's interesting is, what is failure? It's just more information, you
Yeah.
know? Like, it's not really bad or good. Most stuff isn't really bad or good. I think we we buy into this belief of like everything's like black and white, when it's just like it's gray and fascinating and weird, right? I talk about this a lot with sadness and joy. um so like my father passed away in 2015, and his brother showed up for the first time since their mom died, so that was like 30
Mhm.
years before. So I'm feeling grief and sadness because my dad's dying, but now I'm feeling joy and gratitude because they're there, and I'm like, oh, I can't have both feelings. How do I feel all these feelings? And it was like, oh my goodness, I can feel all the feelings. That there's something magical about the beauty of sadness, right? That there's something amazing, that like there's a beauty and joy, but there's just such phenomenal power and greatness in sadness as well. So, can you live a life of bliss? Yes, but it's not always going to be happy then. You're going to have to just enjoy whatever the roller coaster is actually providing you, and not constantly be looking for, what do I need to do next? What is the right thing to do next? What is the correct thing to do next? Because everyone that's trying to figure out what the next place is, right? Trying to figure out what's correct, or what are we going to do in the post-pandemic world? They're coming from a place of such scarcity, and being like, I need to be right because I'm scared that I'll be wrong. It's
Hmm.
just like, you can't be wrong, dude. The only way in which you can be wrong is to judge yourself, and
Yeah.
just not enjoy what is actually happening right at this moment. Because I ask people this all the time. What are your most memorable moments in your life? Oh, they're their play, fun, joy moments. Oh, they are? So why then are we not focused on having more of those? Why are we not scheduling those out? Why are we not hanging out with our friends and being like, I do this all the time, of like, think of your most fun, joy, play moments of 2020, right? Even during the pandemic, even during all that pain and suffering, who was with you during those times? And then reach back out to those people and be like, I want more of those moments for the rest of 2021. Can we create those together? Like, is that possible? Oh, that would be so good.
Yeah, actually, my solo retreat in the yurt ended up becoming karaoke and drinking wine and dancing until 2 a.m. And I realized that the medicine in that for me is that because I've been in a small apartment here in Long Beach, I haven't sang in a long time. And that is my first medicine. That is one of the things that brings me so much joy because my neighbors are like, oh, keep it down. And yet here I am in the middle of the jungle, being able to sing at the top of my lungs and remembering what that feels like in my
Right,
body.
right, right. Oh my goodness. There's something else that like really blows my mind. And you probably already know about this. The stuff specifically around Blackfoot and the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Do you remember
Mhm.
that?
I know about Maslow's.
Okay. So this is what I just love about this. Okay. So I'm so fascinated by this. And I feel like I rarely talk about this, but this is the perfect podcast to talk about it. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Abraham Maslow,
Yeah.
he got it from the Blackfoot Nation. He was hanging out with the Native American Blackfoot Nation. And what it was, that triangle wasn't a triangle, it was a teepee. That's what it was. And then Maslow misinterpreted or reinterpreted what the hierarchy of needs is, right? In Western perspective, it's like your physiological needs and safety all the way up until self-actualization. But the First Nation perspective, the Blackfoot's perspective is self-actualization's at the bottom,
Oh,
followed by community actualization, meaning like, how do we connect together as a community and rediscover who we are collectively. And then at the top is something that is just crazy, and this is why I had to look it up, called cultural perpetuity. And what that basically means, it means breath of life, which means like, what did your ancestors breathe into you? And then what are you breathing to the next generation? And it also communicates how you are not relevant. You are not relevant in like, the greater scheme of things, except for the fact that you are the most important link between your ancestors and your future ancestors, right? The future people. So like this approach that the reason why we're in such suffering all the time is we're constantly trying to think of like, well, how can I have an impact while I'm on this earth? Because people have to remember me and everything like that. And when you don't approach it from that standpoint, right? And you approach it from like, I'm on every day I'm alive, I'm honoring my ancestors by being me, by doing the thing that makes me come most alive, right? All of a sudden it's much easier to show up. You're not worried about being correct or not being correct because you're not living this life just for you. You're living it for something bigger, right? And that's when you're more likely to take risks, because then it's just not about you. It's about like every time you do something that makes you come most alive, you're giving permission for all these other people to do the same, right? And that is how you're changing the world. More of that, please.
So how would you say that then to somebody who's like, but Jeff, it's great you're preaching these things, except I got to go to work. I got to punch in the clock. I got to make money. Is it possible for more of us to step into this frequency of play?
Mm-hmm. So the way I would first ask it is like, just don't quit your job. Don't be like, all right, I'm gonna up and quit my job and join a circus and go everywhere, right? Like, I don't think we need to, again, that's such a black and white sort of thinking that is like built off of like a white supremacist patriarchal culture, right? It's more the idea of like, let's just start small, right? Let's do this. Why don't you first reach out to 3 to 5 of your closest friends and ask them these 2 questions. What impact do I have in your life? And another way of asking that is like, what value do I bring to your life? Like, why are we friends, right? Because a lot of times we forget the impact we have on people's lives. And then the second question I ask, and I do this all the time with my clients, is then I go, ask your friends, when have you seen me most alive? And another way of asking that is like, when have you seen me most playful, most creative, most myself, right? So you ask those 2 questions. What impact have I had on your life? When have you seen me most alive? You ask 3 to 5 of your friends, talk to them over the phone, and you can even put this on social media if it helps, and then get all the answers back. And they start to remind you of all of these ways in which you used to play, right? All these ways in which you used to show up. And then you're like, okay, this is going to give you a bunch of nerve-sighted ideas of where you can start exploring. We don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to like be like, okay, well, I don't want to leave. I want to leave my job, and then I'm going to, and then I'm going to, be a trapeze artist. Like, you don't have to figure all that out. Just follow your curiosity. Even Elizabeth Gilbert says this: don't follow your passion. Forget about that, because many people don't even know what their passion is. Just start following your curiosity and just see where that takes you. And in the same time, if you got to do the job that you have to do, work that job knowing that you are funding your curiosities, right? That if you know that you're like, okay, I got to work 40 hours a week for X amount of weeks so that I can go on this trip to Hawaii that's going to help me figure out what's next, then awesome. Then all of a sudden your perspective on the responsibility changes because you're thinking about how you're doing something that's bigger than yourself in this moment.
Oh, oh, Jeff. Wow. Yes, and I I feel like we take ourselves so seriously
Ourselves
sometimes.
so
Oh,
seriously, and why? And why? Because society is telling us that we have to. Society is telling us that we have to be perfect, and like if the pandemic taught us anything, is that no one knows what they're doing. Nobody knows what they're doing, and
mhm.
anyone that's trying to claim that they know what they're doing doesn't know. So why are we listening to other people's advice, especially if it doesn't resonate with us?
So I'm sure that you've probably had your fair share of people who may have wondered if they should even take you seriously because of the work that you do. I know you're just like, whatever, I'm making my money, I'm getting my clients, so people actually want to hire me. They want to, I get paid to play and to support others with being able to do that. And it could be there could be a misconception that those of us who love to play are happy all the time.
Oh yeah, right. There's this like toxic positivity part, right?
Mhm.
So let's talk about that. I mean, and this kind of ties in with what I said earlier about the idea of like beautiful sadness or any emotion, right? Is like toxic positivity is delusional, right? And in positive psychology, that's not what they teach. What they teach is that every emotion really is important. It's all informational. And the beauty of life is that you feel all of the feelings. And what most people do, or a lot of times we do, is we numb ourselves. So
Mhm.
then we can't enjoy the highs, you know, because we're so scared of, experiencing the lows, but that's part of the journey. And I'm not happy all the time, dude. Things aren't
Mhm.
always working out for me, right? But it's more the idea of like, okay, I'm sad. Let me actually feel all of my sadness. In the book Tuesdays with Maury would always talk about this. This is a guy that's dying, and he would be like,
Mhm.
I feel the whole feeling. I allow it to flow fully through me. And that's the only way I can actually let it go.
Mhm.
Right. So, like those times in which you want to numb yourself when you're alone, or you're like, look at your phone because you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so lonely. Don't look at your phone. Just sit there. Just stand there. Just enjoy whatever is happening at that very moment in time and feel like the fact that you even can feel sadness is magical. 600,000 people died in the last year of COVID, 4 million across the world, maybe more,
Mhm.
right? You have the opportunity to just experience life that other people would give anything to have, right? So this is part of the roller coaster ride. So why not enjoy the roller coaster ride?
So, what is it that you do to stay grounded whenever you're feeling pulled away from your purpose? And also, what has letting go taught you about being able to achieve even more in your life?
Oh, let me first answer the letting go question. You know when you when you're like fully in the moment and just things start to like click and feels right, and then you fall into flow and you just get in the zone and you're just like you just forget about time, like you're not actually focused on results like at all. Like I think of how I built, that Lego STEM organization. We had no idea what we were doing ever. We never knew. And we never knew where it was going to go. Like, and it's crazy that people plan out their life in a linear way because when you look back at your life, none of it's linear. None of it is ever linear. So why are we doing so much planning? I'm not saying you shouldn't do any planning, but it's just like none of it is. Like most of the most magical moments of your life, you don't even know how you got there. So I trust in that. I trust that if I play enough and I follow my curiosity, what did my friend Kirsten Anderson said? She goes, curious conversations create cash. And I
Mm.
was like, what did you say? She was like, the more fun, interesting curious conversations I have, the more money I make. How is that even possible? Because you're connecting with people that value your work.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're like, I need to give you some money. You know what I'm saying? So I think we a lot of times don't trust that enough. And we're like, well, I need to know. And it's just like, guess what? No one knows. No one knows, man. And just like, you know, I always say this, let's learn from the dying. You know, one of the biggest regrets of the dying is I wish I lived the life that I wanted to live and not the life that others expected of me. Right. And for us that have immigrant parents, right. And you might appreciate this, is for the longest time, my dad, when I was doing my fun Lego job at the time, he was just like, when are you going to get a serious job? When are you going to get a serious job? When are you going to stop messing around? When are you going to stop fooling around? When are you stop being like a kid? And then one day I shared with him how I was like now making like 6 figures and we built this $1 million organization and all this stuff. And that ended like just a switch. And he started asking me questions in a different way. And really what, you know, that I could hear from my dad was he was just scared of me not being okay. And once he realized that I had built something out of something weird and crazy, but I had built something, all of a sudden it changed. You know, it didn't shift perfectly, right? And he still would ask me from time to time, but like, oh, I can make a career out of this. And think about how many people have made careers out of the craziest ideas just in the last 10 years. I know someone that plays video games for a living. I know someone that whispers into a microphone and makes a ton of money doing that. I know people that make money doing TikTok. Like, we don't know what in the next 5 to 10 years, what new professions are going to come from this pandemic. Right? Your medicine might be the most important thing, you know, that people didn't even know they needed. So we need to stop judging ourselves so much and just like show up with a certain level of curiosity and play, and then just not take ourselves so seriously.
Yeah, and we need to do away with the phrase curiosity killed the cat.
Right.
Curiosity cured the kid. How about that?
Right. And even if it did kill the cat, that cat had an amazing life, such a better life than like someone that didn't have curiosity. So why would I want to live a boring life? Like, come on, man. Like,
so what is a ritual or practice that you would invite people to do so that they can reclaim this journey of play in their lives?
So I learned this from my friend Desiree, who was doing the van life for a while and traveling all over the world. And she had asked this question of herself, which I really just love. And it's a positive priming question where she asked herself, whether she was having a bad day or a good day, whatever is happening at the beginning of the day, she would ask, how can it get any better than this? And she would ask it from a place of curiosity, not from a place of yearning of like, I needed to get better, but more like, how can it get any better than this, right? So I'll give you an example. Today, woke up to today. I made a TikTok video to start my day. Ooh, how can it get any better than this, right? And I prime my day to see the world as play, right? Ooh, how can it get any better than this? Oh, then I had this really awesome conversation this morning from a client. Ooh, how can it get any better than this? Then you called me or you texted me and you were like, hey, we can't, you know, we got to push the meeting back. And now I get to watch my Euro Championship soccer game. Ooh, how can it get any better than this, right? Then I hopped on this call to like, be interviewed by this TV station. Oh, how can it get any better than this? Right. And now we're having our conversation. How can it get any better than this? I don't think it can get better. Right. But I'm just fascinated with the possibility that it can. Right. So when people say I had a bad day, I say, I challenge your bad day. I do not think you had a bad day, because thoughts usually last and emotions last usually 90 seconds. You have a chemical process that exists for 90 seconds. And then you have a choice to continue that emotional loop or not. So you can choose to have more bad moments by ruminating about the first bad moment. So that's what people do. That's why they have a bad day. They prime their brain to look for the next bad moment, the next bad moment. And then they even say, you know, bad moments come in threes. And then guess what? They pattern it out to look for 3 bad moments. But by simply asking the question, with curiosity. How can it get any better than this? You can change your hour, you can change your day, and you can change your life.
Wow. Oh, how can it get any better than this? Ooh, that feels good just to ask that question.
So
Yeah,
scrumptious.
my favorite question that I love to ask everybody is, if you could speak to yourself as a future ancestor who's looking back on all the choices you have made in your life, and maybe that version of Jeff who was playing Legos and dad was all like, when are you going to get a real job? What is it that you would say?
So the question is, I'm speaking to someone, myself in the future?
Yes. You are speaking as your future.
Oh, as my future self.
As an ancestor to either
To
your
me
present
now.
day self or your younger self.
Oh, either to myself now or to my younger self.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, be exactly what you're doing. Do you, boo-boo. Whatever you're doing right now is amazing. And what you should do is just do more of you. And anyone else that tells you not to be you is lying. It's just they're not you. It's not their life. It really isn't. I share this thing all the time, this like Goodwill Hunting, story. And I'll just share the last part about it where, Matt Damon's this genius and he could have any job he wants. And his best friend, Ben Affleck's like, are you going to take one of these like high paying jobs? And he's like, I'm not. And like Ben's like, why not? He's like, because, I'm just going to hang out with you, and we're going to raise our kids next to each other at Foley Field. And Ben's like, if I see you here in 20 years, I'm going to kill you. Like, I'm literally going to kill you. And Matt's like, what? I owe it to myself? And he's like, nah, dude, you owe it to me because I'm going to be here in 20 years. And I'm okay with that. But you're sitting on a winning lottery ticket and you're too scared to cash it in. So I would be telling myself, cash in on your winning lottery ticket. Like, be as weird and as nerdy and as strange as you want to be. Because I say this, as I'm saying this to anyone that's listening, is just like, you're sitting on a winning lottery ticket and you're cashing it in, not for you. This is not about you. It has nothing to do with you. This is about you doing it because other people are waiting for you to show up so they can show up. There are literally people that you're either mentoring or they're their kids or people that you don't even know are paying attention to you that are waiting for you to do the thing that makes you come most alive because they can't do their thing until you do your thing, right? Your ancestors are waiting for you to do the thing that makes you come most alive. Everybody's waiting for you. And when you're thinking like, well, I want to change the world, the best way in which to change the world is to do the thing that makes you come most alive. How do you do that? Cash in on that winning lottery ticket and fully show up. So that would be the advice I would say to my self is go all out. Be fully your nerdy you, Jeff. Because why would you do anything else?
Yeah. Look where it's led you.
Right? Like,
so, Jeff, I know, what the heck is going on? Like, you built a six-figure business through Legos and getting adults to play. So if others want to continue playing with you, where is it that they can go and do that?
Sure. So they can see all of my nerdy videos that I love to make I do it on Instagram, TikTok, all the handles, LinkedIn, YouTube, at Jeff Harry Plays, JeffHarryPlays. And then you can come to my website, rediscoveryourplay.com, and you can click on the Let's Play button where I have a bunch of play experiments that you can do to figure out more about who you are. And then we can hop on a phone call and figure out how you can kick more ass in this world all by playing.
And if you're lucky, you're going to get one of the epic Lego ties that I have the privilege of wearing. I'm pretty sure I wore it to a wedding once. And if you're watching the video, or if you're listening, go watch the YouTube version of this so you can see this cute ass tie. But you might get lucky and just get one, because this is what Jeff does for fun as an adult.
As an adult, yes.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
This was so awesome. Thanks so much for having me.